Senator Bushby.
My question is also to the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion. Can the minister advise the Senate about how the coalition government is supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander small businesses and entrepreneurs?
Senator Scullion.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And I thank you for that question, Senator. Mr President, I was very proud to announce with the Prime Minister yesterday that our small business policies are receiving unprecedented results. The Indigenous Procurement Policy, or IPP, has just eclipsed $1 billion in contracts to over 1,000 Indigenous businesses. In fact, it's been so successful that we're applying its principles to our other investments, including in your state, the Launceston City deal and around Launceston. So the data from the 2016 census shows that our policies are overseeing unprecedented growth in the Indigenous business sector. Since the last census, the number of Indigenous businesses has grown by 30%. Now, the sector is still small, despite being 3% of the population, there are only 0.7% of businesses. But if we close that gap, the economy will be $28 billion better off. So that's why yesterday we launched the Indigenous Business Sector Strategy, the first comprehensive roadmap to grow Indigenous business sector that's been co-designed with over 200 Indigenous business people. And I can advise the Senate, as part of this strategy, we'll be rolling out Indigenous business hubs across the country, which will be one-stop shops for business advice and support. We'll be launching a $27 million Indigenous Entrepreneurs Capital Scheme for mature Indigenous businesses who, because of historic undercapitalisation, cannot currently access commercial finance. The other end of the spectrum, will be doubling microfinance to help particularly CDP participants when they want to turn activities into micro-businesses. This is on top of our existing initiatives like our $30 million Indigenous Entrepreneurs Fund and the refocused IBA business support programs.
Senator Bushby, a supplementary question.
Thank you again, Mr President. Can the minister advise what impact these measures are having on getting more Indigenous job seekers off welfare and into work?
Senator Scullion.
I thank the Senator for the question. We know that our policies are helping get more people off the misery of welfare and into the dignity of employment. Data from the census shows that our strong jobs market is particularly benefiting Indigenous Australians. We know that the economy created over 400,000 jobs last year, and since the last census, the number of Indigenous Australians with a job has increased by 23.3%. Now, a lot of that is down to our small business policies like the IPP, because we know if we get more Indigenous businesses in the economy, then we're likely to get more Indigenous workers into work. The average Indigenous workforce in our IPP firms is around 41% Indigenous employment, compares to the Indigenous workforce in mainstream, which is 0.7%. It means by supporting more Indigenous businesses, we get more Indigenous job seekers into work by a factor of 60. These are fantastic results, Mr President,
has expired.
And growing.
Senator Bushby, final supplementary question.
Thank you again. Can the minister advise why the growth of the Indigenous business sector and the government's jobs agenda are critical to our efforts at closing the gap?
Senator Scullion.
Mr President, well, clearly our policies have been a success, and it's just down to being fair dinkum about things. The IPP works because we set targets that are clear, and we made the secretaries for every department accountable for those targets. Unfortunately, what came before the IPP was a convoluted web of policies that no one understood or really ever enforced. It's any wonder that in 2012-13 it was only 30 Indigenous businesses won about $6.2 million in contracts. Contrast that to our policies, which have taken Indigenous procurement from $6.2 to $1 billion in just 2.5 years. We're making the necessary investments to keep this growth growing through the Indigenous Business Sector Strategy. Unfortunately, the previous approach was a National Partnership Agreement on Indigenous economic participation that was signed up in 2008 with all jurisdictions with much fanfare, but unfortunately just corporate speak, no response, no resourcing, and did absolutely nothing.